The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Well, I was hoping to come to you today and tell you I have such great news. We got close enough to the 500 new financial supporters to make some really exciting things happen. We've hired someone. They're here, and it was all going to be just so exciting and amazing, and up and away. But sadly, I have terrible news for people today. I have actually disastrous news, genuinely. I and Pat also try to find silver linings in literally everything that has ever happened on or related to the program. But I don't think there is any silver lining here. We've been hacked, and we've lost quite a few thousands of dollars in previous show revenue from an account with Coinbase. Now, Coinbase is the largest cryptocurrency exchange, and we use Coinbase to receive cryptocurrency that is contributed by viewers and listeners. We also use cryptocurrency to be paid for some of the ad deals that we make with companies. That account has been hacked, and we've lost many thousands of dollars. Now, there's an investigation going on. I want to focus really on a solution here. I don't, what happened. Coinbase has totally locked up our account, which also, by the way, means we can't get any of our other money out of it for the time being until the investigation is complete, which could take more than a month. And I basically, I don't want to give every single detail as to how this happened, but we were having an issue with our Coinbase account, and I both submitted a ticket through the Coinbase website and contacted the official verified Coinbase Twitter account. And that Coinbase Twitter account asked publicly for our ticket number. And, my better instincts did not kick in, and I should have realized that publicly sending a ticket number would be a very, very bad idea and could be misused. But hey, this is Coinbase. This is the top cryptocurrency exchange in the world. If their security protocol says it's okay for them to publicly ask for ticket numbers, then I sent it. I had a lot going on yesterday, and that information combined with effectively a doxing of sorts that took place was able to be used by a hacker scammer to take a bunch of money from the show. That's the bottom line. We're in touch with the FBI because this is a theft of money, right? The idea that it's cryptocurrency doesn't mean many thousands of dollars were stolen, and that is, of course, a crime. Am I optimistic there will be any resolution? No. What I am asking you to help with is to politely contact Coinbase, either through both of their Twitter accounts, Coinbase and Coinbase Support, or by emailing press@coinbase.com, which I believe is more actively monitored, and say, the David Pakman Show really got crushed, and it all goes back to that request for a public ticket number. That really shouldn't be your protocol, but we need you to help the David Pakman Show. Coinbase in the past has been known to compensate individuals who are in these situations. They've also been known not to compensate individuals who are in these situations. So I wish I had some positive spin to put on this, but it's really, really bad.
Yeah, it's been a tough year for the show. I remember last year we were getting more views than ever, more ad revenue than ever because of the election and Trump's inauguration. Then we got hit by the YouTube advertiser boycott.
Yes.
And things went downhill from there. Recently, we've been getting into cryptocurrency and doing these ICO reviews, and we got hit by the same thing, it seems.
And we got hit, and also in between those two things in the last 12 months, we got completely shut down from our Amazon affiliate link as well. So yeah, it's the show audience has never been bigger, and yet we continue coming across these stumbling blocks. And one of the worst parts about this, Pat, is even though a bunch of our crypto was stolen, not all of it was, but we no longer have access to the stuff that wasn't. So even though several $1,000s were stolen, effectively we have access to none of it now because even the stuff we have is all tied up for security reasons while Coinbase conducts this investigation, which again could take a month or more.
Yeah. I found a silver lining though.
Okay.
We still have our members and our patrons to support the show.
And we still have our health. And I think that that's an important thing not to lose sight of. People always say that, at least you still have your health and you've not been physically victimized, and all of that is true. So again, listen, I mean, number one, we need to see how much money we can get back. I do believe that there is some liability here by Coinbase publicly asking for ticket numbers rather than saying direct message us a ticket number or do not send any ticket number, right? Saying send us your ticket number publicly is a real problem. So I do think that there is some liability there. We need to see how much money, if any, we'll get back. Number two, have to get that account cleared and reactivated so that we can actually resume operations, since that account is really important to what we're doing. I'm mobilizing every resource that I can, but I am coming to you for help in pushing this along. So press at Coinbase.com. Tweet to @Coinbase and @Coinbase support. Explain that this is a huge thing, that you are watching what Coinbase is doing, because I think the possibility that they don't handle this well and that is publicly discussed will maybe get them moving on this. And I promise you that if they do handle this well and appropriately, I will update you as well, right? So it's not just that I'm out here complaining, trying to trash a company. Coinbase is a company that has done right by us exclusively, completely up until this time. More than a month of our money being tied up with no a positive resolution would be a disaster. So help us. You can say this is all related to @DPakman or @David Pakman Show on Twitter, or david@davidpakman.com. I wish I had more to say. I don't, but it's not been a good 24 hours, that's for sure. Remember when Donald Trump and Republicans passed their tax plan? And I told you that this tax plan was going to allow Donald Trump to claim two victories. Victory number one, that he did tax reform, even though the tax reform he did was the opposite of what the tax reform he promised to do would have done in terms of its effect on people. Secondly, the tax bill would allow Trump to say that he repealed Obamacare. It's not true, but it was going to let him say it. The tax plan that Trump and Republicans passed did make a change to Obamacare. It eliminated the individual health care mandate, which says every individual must have some kind of insurance or pay a fine. But Trump is now selling it as if he did straight up get rid of Obamacare. Trump did another one of these really weird rallies in Michigan recently, and he said, essentially, we are getting rid of Obamacare. Some people would say, essentially, we have gotten rid of it. Now, this is a lie, but this is predictable. We knew that Donald Trump was going to sell this to his followers as having put Obamacare in total in the trash, even though most of Obamacare is still in place. But there's another further layer to Trump's lie. The Trump administration is actually enforcing some aspects of Obamacare more strongly than the Obama administration did. And Republicans, as well as some business owners, are angry with Trump for that. So, for example, Trump got rid of the individual mandate, but the employer mandate is still there. The employer mandate says if you have a company with more than 50 full-time employees, you must offer health insurance to workers or pay a fine. That's still in place. And according to numerous reports, that is not just in writing as part of the law, it is being enforced. Businesses are actually being fined under Trump for not offering health care when they're supposed to based on Obamacare law. So the big picture is the exchanges still exist. The coverage requirements exist, right? Health insurers aren't allowed to go back to those disastrous plans that didn't even meet the minimum insurance conditions of Obamacare. The pre-existing conditions requirement is still there. The corporate mandate is still there. It's all still there other than the individual mandate. Obamacare in total exists, with the exception that if you don't have coverage, you won't pay a fine. And all that does is make coverage more expensive for people, because the idea is the fines make more people choose to have coverage. That grows the risk pool, spreads risk among more people, and in principle, companies don't have to charge as much for health insurance. So this is not a matter of opinion, right? It is a lie to say that Donald Trump has gotten rid of Obamacare. Whether he says we essentially got rid of it or we got rid of it, either way, it's not true. And there's a funny and tragic element to this, which is that Trump said dozens or hundreds of times during the campaign that he would not only get rid of Obamacare, but he was going to replace it with a beautiful new system where everyone would be covered for less money than under Obamacare. If Trump believes that he got rid of Obamacare, which is what he's saying he did, where is the beautiful replacement that he told us we would have? Because even if he claims to have gotten rid of Obamacare, which he didn't, there's no question that he hasn't come up with a replacement, which he also said that he would do. Normal people would realize that this is a lie, right? And the most interesting perspective I'm thinking about is, are enough Republicans falling for this that it will actually earn him votes in the fall? Like, in other words, are people going to reward Trump and Republicans for, quote, getting rid of Obamacare, even though they didn't, and vote for Republicans and Trump in November? Because in reality, if they want to vote on the basis of did Trump do what he said he would do, they should not be voting for Trump. I have a feeling that this is going to convince a lot of people.
I think this is the lie that he will get away with, and it's because most Trump supporters aren't employers with 50 or more employees, so they don't have to deal with that.
Correct.
The thing that they didn't like about Obamacare was the individual mandate, and maybe they liked some of the other specific provisions, like staying on your parents' health care till you were 26.
Sure.
So in the eyes of most people, he did what he set out to do, mission accomplished.
There's another issue also, which is that not only are most Trump voters, as you're saying, not owners of businesses with more than 50 full-time employees, they're also mostly not on marketplace plans, meaning most of them have insurance through their employer, so they're not even connected to this individual mandate. Like, it existed for a while and it didn't impact them, and then now it's gone and it still doesn't impact them, and it's completely a sort of academic or theoretical thing. So I think you're completely right. This is a lie that Trump is going to benefit from. He did it. He got rid of Obamacare, even though he got rid of 1% of Obamacare, or 5%, one specific provision here. That's my question to you. Will Republican voters fall for this lie from Donald Trump? I'm on Twitter at dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Daniel McCulley. Daniel, thank you for being a member. Thank you for signing up at joinpakman.com. But it's not just the new members that matter. It's every member, including our long-term sustaining members. And Sarah Shih is today's longtime member of the day. She's been with us since 2012. 6 years of membership for Sarah Shih. Not quite 6 years for Dan McCulley. But thanks to both of you. Join them at joinpakman.com. This is viewer and listener supported media. You can use the coupon code VOTESOON18 for a 40% discount, and you can also make a pledge of as little as one single solitary dollar per month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. We are one step closer to a subpoena of the President of the United States. We've known for a while that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller in the Trump-Russia investigation wants to speak to Donald Trump. We've known for a while that most of the constantly rotating cast of Donald Trump's personal attorneys don't want Trump to have a personal meeting with Robert Mueller or Mueller's investigators. And the reasons why are obvious. Trump is a megalomaniac and a compulsive liar. Putting someone like him in a room with skilled, knowledgeable investigators is not likely to end well for Donald Trump. So the idea we knew was being floated was, well, maybe they'll do a written interview. Or in other words, Mueller will send a list of questions to Trump's lawyers who would then write answers on behalf of Donald Trump. And this would be not a great way to conduct an investigation. It would allow Trump to leave out relevant information that would come up in a conversation. It would allow Trump's lawyers to really sort of sanitize what Trump has done, said, or knew to the most utterly benign statements such that they will be effectively meaningless to Robert Mueller and his investigation. Well, the good news is we've now learned that Robert Mueller says, no, we're not doing a written interview. And this is the correct decision. This is the obvious decision. The mere premise that Trump should be allowed in an investigation of this magnitude and at this level, of this caliber, to have his lawyers write down answers is completely asinine. It is not how a good criminal investigation is done, period. He can show up and plead the fifth if he wants, sure, which, by the way, Trump says if you plead the fifth, it means you're guilty. Or if he gets subpoenaed, he can try to figure out a way around the subpoena. But lawyers writing answers for you? Give me a break. This is not a take-home midterm in Sociology 101, right? Show up and do what you're supposed to do. And I will warn you, the reason we know that the offer for a written interview has been rejected is because Trump's newest lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, told CBS News about this. Rudy has had a very fast and loose relationship with the truth over the last few days in these disastrous interviews and statements he's been doing. So it's always possible that we just can't believe Rudy, but no one's contradicting this. So there's every indication that, yeah, Mueller has said, no, we're not going to just do a written interview. There are now two directions that this could go, right? Trump agrees to an in-person interview, or Trump does not agree to an in-person interview. And at that point, Robert Mueller will also have a choice to make. If Trump does not agree to the in-person interview, does Robert Mueller issue a subpoena, or does he say, you know what, I'm not going to issue the subpoena? And if Robert Mueller does issue the subpoena, then we will have a situation where it may get up to the Supreme Court to adjudicate whether Donald Trump, as a sitting president, is bound by the power of Robert Mueller's subpoena. I don't know the answer. Numerous legal scholars say that a sitting president would have to comply with a subpoena from Robert Mueller. There are others, particularly those in the Trump camp, who say that may not be the case, and he's not going down without a fight. So it could get very, very ugly.
I think it's certainly a no-win situation for Trump. If he takes the interview, he's probably going to lie to the FBI, and that's a serious charge.
Or tell the truth and admit to really bad things that he doesn't even know are bad things to admit to.
That's possible, too. Yeah. Or if it goes to the courts, I think it's likely going to be decided that the president can be subpoenaed, and maybe they'll rule on more things, too, like can the president be indicted? And I don't think that's a road he wants to go down.
I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. I don't know that they would actually be in a position to rule as to whether the president can be indicted until there's an attempt at an indictment. Same reason why they're not ruling on the subpoena power now. They would need an actual case to be appealed there. But those are the types of questions that are very, very quickly going to become key issues. This could end up at the Supreme Court, where Trump's buddy Neil Gorsuch would have a role in deciding whether the subpoena power stands or not from Robert Mueller. As far as timing, Giuliani is saying he needs a few weeks to get up to speed on everything going on. I think that the recent interviews prove that Rudy Giuliani isn't quite up to speed yet, and they also want to wait beyond the North Korea summit. Hilarious explanation, though, right? Like, does anyone imagine that the guy who, so the other element to this that I want to mention is that Giuliani says Trump needs time to prepare for the North Korea summit, so they can't deal with this right now. Trump demands all materials be on one page and be mostly pictures. Like, does anyone believe he's intensely preparing for the North Korea summit?
Oh, and he has time to tweet all day, but somehow doesn't have time for the actual activities of being president.
Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it's really, really important in these situations to zoom out a little bit. Sometimes we get lost in the details. The circumstances are that the legal team for the president of the United States does not want the president to be interviewed because either they're worried he will lie or they're worried that he will tell the truth, a truth that will get him in even more trouble. And that's the ultimate underlying reality. Remember that Hillary Clinton testified for hours on television, and Trump's lawyers don't want him sitting down at all, even behind closed doors with Robert Mueller or his investigators. And this is why there are rumors in Washington, once again, about the attempt or desire to fire Robert Mueller. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the program. Donald Trump has seemingly, again, implicitly admitted that he's obstructing justice. There are three, call them pillars, of the Trump-Russia investigation that's being conducted by Robert Mueller. First is, was there illegal coordination or exchange of things of value between Trump associates and Russian associates? Pillar number two of the investigation is, in an attempt to stop the investigation into that possible coordination, were crimes committed? Those crimes could be obstruction of justice, they could be witness tampering, there could be other possible crimes. And pillar number three of Robert Mueller's investigation is whether financial crimes come to light as a result of an investigation of the first two, potentially involving Trump and Russians. Let's focus in today on part two, obstruction. Obstruction itself has many layers. For example, was the firing of James Comey obstruction of justice? Since Trump admitted that the firing was meant to hamper the Russia investigation, he said that to Lester Holt, who interviewed him on NBC News months ago. Was the request made of James Comey by Donald Trump to lay off of Michael Flynn because, after all, he's a good guy, let the Flynn thing go? Was that an attempt to obstruct justice? Has there been witness tampering in possible communications with Michael Flynn or Paul Manafort or whoever else? And Donald Trump has now tweeted about the obstruction of justice concerns. Yesterday, Donald Trump took to Twitter and said the Russia witch hunt is rapidly losing credibility. House Intelligence Committee found no collusion, coordination, or anything else with Russia. So now the probe says, okay, what else is there? How about obstruction for a made-up phony crime? There is no obstruction. It's called fighting back. And those are the key words. Is there any other context in which fighting back against not charges, but an investigation would be considered just the benign actions of someone defending themselves? If police stop you and are investigating possible drunk driving, they haven't charged you, at which point, of course, you lawyer up and you fight back. Police stop you and they're investigating possible drunk driving. In what way do you fight back in that investigation that would be considered acceptable? Even if the current investigation is a partisan witch hunt by Democrats. By the way, Mueller and Comey are both Republicans their entire lives. Even if the investigation has credibility problems, you can't break the law to fight the investigation. Or how about a different analogy? As corrupt as banks may be, as much as banks might be taking advantage of poor people, for example, you can't fight that by robbing a bank. Robbing a bank remains a crime either way. If the investigation was truly worthless, if there was no possible criminality by Trump that he was worried about, you don't fight back and fire people and tamper with witnesses and prevent depositions and interviews. You say, I look forward to being vindicated and will cooperate in any way that I can. This is, again, not the way an innocent person behaves.
Yeah, I know this is like a tweet and not an action, but in a way it's a more clear-cut example of obstruction of justice.
Yeah.
Because when Trump fired Comey or dismissed Flynn, there was an argument to be made that, well, he's the president, he has the right to fire these people.
Sure.
But saying that you're going to fight back, that's as clear as it gets, I think.
This is not an action, but it is an explanation as to the motives of other actions that he has taken. And that's why it's very important. And that's the one saving grace here, right? In terms of the semantic debate around whether fighting back against a federal investigation is in principle obstruction of justice, which is Trump's characterization is that he is fighting back, but that's not a crime. What matters is what the law says about Trump's actions, right? Trump's characterization of obstructing or fighting back doesn't matter. The question is, what does the justice system believe about the actions Trump has taken to fight back? When your fight interferes with investigations or goes beyond the law in terms of contact with witnesses, for example, it doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is whether what you did is against the law. Okay, let's get now to the fight to get rid of Robert Mueller. There's a really good article about how Republicans are planning to get rid of Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller in Slate with the goal of ending the Russia investigation. Most of the conversation about getting rid of Mueller is focused around, will Trump fire him or not? Does Trump have the authority to fire him? Does he have to direct someone else like Rod Rosenstein to fire him, which of course could trigger massive protests? Would it stand up constitutionally? But we've now heard from Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, who says that Republicans are going to go about it the following way. Devin Nunes, Republican congressman, recently said that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, should be held in contempt of Congress. Sounds tough, right? From one Republican to another, one Trump crony to another. Why is Nunes going after Sessions so hard? The reason Devin Nunes says Sessions should be held in contempt is that the Justice Department recently refused to comply with a subpoena from Nunes that includes classified documents. The Justice Department said, the documents are classified. It would be very risky for us to comply with the subpoena because if we release that classified information, it could lead to things as serious as people dying. So the idea is issue subpoenas for classified information. The Department of Justice refuses to comply, and then you slam them for refusing to comply and call for the removal of someone like Rod Rosenstein. Rosenstein has said he's not going to be bullied when it comes to Trump Russia. You then have the replacement to Rod Rosenstein get in there and say, hey, listen, this thing's too political. We're ending the Mueller investigation. Mueller is fired. The other possibility is you get them to release the classified information through the subpoenas, and then you go after Rosenstein for releasing classified information. So this is the tactic that they're using here. More than likely, Rosenstein would refuse to release that information. Republicans would immediately call for his removal, his replacement, the replacement potentially getting rid of Robert Mueller in a way that is less connected to Trump fired him. It's pretty transparent, right? Like if there's any good thing we can find here is that I would say it's that Devin Nunes' behavior is so obvious and transparent that I would hope it's not going to go unnoticed and actually work. Like Nunes might think he's being really slick all the time and that everything he does is just so well planned, nobody's going to notice. The underlying intentions are abundantly clear, and I'm hoping that prevents this from happening.
And I'm not entirely clear on how Jeff Sessions would be held in contempt of Congress, because didn't he recuse himself from the Russia investigation altogether?
Well, I think some of the requests don't relate to Russia stuff, so it could conceivably be within Sessions' purview to either approve or not. But that you're getting at the point here, which is if you specifically make requests related to subject matter on which Sessions is recused, then it goes to Rosenstein, and you then make Rosenstein the target. There is one fact that all of this makes undeniably clear, which is that there's only one way to protect Robert Mueller and protect the investigation. You know what it is, Pat? I'm sure you can guess.
Think it over for a little bit.
Vote in November.
Oh, yes.
That's the one way.
Vote in November.
That's the one way, right? People voting in the midterm elections and getting Republicans out of power who are part of the protection apparatus of Robert Mueller, or rather, I'm sorry, the attack apparatus against Robert Mueller is really the only protection that we can give him. And even if we get the left to get out and vote in November, will we have a fair election? Because we know Russia's already trying to tamper with the midterms, and it doesn't seem Donald Trump is too interested in stopping that. So it is a real uphill battle. And at least, hopefully, awareness of what it is that's being done here will prevent Mueller from being fired in this way. Take a quick break. Discuss this with us on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Jackie Salit, who is an advocate for the rights of independent voters, also president of Independent Voting, which is the largest network of independent leaders and activists in the U.S. with organization in 40 states. Jackie, I think a good place to start before we get into third parties is maybe talking a little bit about independent voters. There's sometimes the idea that by virtue of being an independent voter, you're either a centrist or in some way neutral between conservative and political ideas. For the most part, that's not true, though, right? I mean, for the most part, independent voters have no party affiliation, but they do still tend to be on one side or the other of the political spectrum.
In my experience, independents span the entire political spectrum from right to left. When you ask them about social issues or policy issues, those kinds of things. However, the bond that ties independents together, and as you know, this is now 44% of the country who identify themselves as independents. The bond that ties them together is a belief that the political system is broken, that the parties serve largely their own self-preservation and not the purpose and the mission of representing the interests of the American people. And they have declared themselves to be independents because they want to make a statement about that.
Sure. And I guess what my point is, and I'm curious whether you would agree, that an independent party is sometimes thought of as a definitive centrist party, but that in reality that there's no rule that says that that's the way it would have to be. You have lots of independents that are on the right and even to the right of the Republican Party. You have lots of independents that are certainly to the left of the Democratic Party. And would you agree that it would be wrong to assume that an independent party of any substantial size would be necessarily simply a centrist party between Democrats and Republicans?
I would totally agree with that.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of practical paths towards third-party growth and engagement. I've pointed out in the last several years that I think that there are two major impediments to growing the number of votes for third-party candidates, at least in presidential elections. Number one is campaign finance and sort of how politics is financed in the United States. And number two, it's the lack of a voting system like an instant runoff voting system that would allow someone to more easily support the candidate that their politics most closely align with which might not be a Republican or independent, without possibly ending up helping the candidate they most disagree with. Assess my assessment of those two items.
I think, look, in the last 25 years or so, there actually have been independent parties that have exploded, and I do use the term exploded purposefully onto the political scene. Most notably, I think the Reform Party in the 1990s, that was the political party that grew out of what's known today as the Perot Rebellion after Ross Perot's first run in 1992. And for a period of about 5 or 6 years, there was the framework, shall we say, of a third party that was non-ideological in its orientation, that was reform-oriented in its mission, and that brought together people across the political spectrum, across geographical divides, ideological divides, socioeconomic divides, et cetera, and had a brief shining moment, if you will, as a new, not just a new party, but a new kind of political party. Now, for a variety of reasons, the Reform Party was destroyed and disabled after this 6-year experiment, and I was a part of that, and it was, an incredibly energized and controversial political effort, controversial in a lot of political circles. So I think that when you point to barriers, and surely those barriers are there, from ballot access to the fear of spoiler voting to campaign finance regulations, to debate regulations, to the ways that elections are administered, namely as a bipartisan rather than a nonpartisan affair, and so on and so forth. All of that comes into play. There's no question about that. And I think that part of what's going on right now in the reform movement and in the independent political movement is there's a lot of energy and a lot of attention being paid to what kinds of structural reforms are necessary in order to make it more possible for a third force to emerge. Whether it emerges as a party or not, that's kind of an interesting question, frankly, because given that the sentiment of so many Americans, particularly independents, but not exclusively, is to be disappointed and distressed by the parties and by the kinds of partisanship that they produce, it's not altogether clear to me that a third party is going to be or should be the form that a new force takes.
But, yeah, well, so I think it's interesting you're mentioning that, because you do have independents who are not Republicans or Democrats because they don't want to be part of either of those two parties. There are also independents who are sort of against the concept of political parties, and those are two different things, and it's important to distinguish.
Yes, and I would add, I agree with you, and I think that that's very true. They're not just against the concept of political parties, they're just against having these corrupt, authoritarian, controlling structures that limit competition and are completely focused on, their own political power over the interests of ordinary people. They're against that. And so then the issue becomes, well, what are we going to create that does give people a platform and tools to fully participate in what is supposed to be a self-governance process in this country, but which, frankly, the parties are one of the major obstacles to realizing that.
So, Jackie, in your sort of context, right, is the do you think that the independent, there's this sort of stereotypical or caricatured independent who says something like, well, I'm socially liberal and fiscally conservative, so therefore I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'll just vote for whichever Republican or Democrat is closest to my views. That's not really sounding to me like the type of independent that you're talking about or targeting, right?
Why do you say that?
Well, because you seem to be more focused, and not as a criticism, but you seem to be more focused on those who are independents, not because they share views with some Democrats and Republicans, but rather because they feel that the infrastructure that exists between these two parties and the corruption that's sort of inherent to our political finance system are the problem. It's not about, I'm kind of with the Democrats on some issues and with Republicans on others, but it's a different paradigm altogether. That's what I'm gathering. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I see. No, well, that's true. I think that's accurate, though. I guess the one caveat I would add here is that I actually think that most Americans are socially liberal, broadly defined.
I agree.
And fiscally conservative, broadly defined. So
not sure I agree on that part.
those descriptions get talked about in a somewhat elevated way or a categorical kind of way. But I mean, I think in people's personal and private lives and family lives, everybody has to manage a budget, and you're only allowed to borrow but so much.
Yeah.
And most people have a kind of live and let live attitude, and and somewhere between libertarian and progressive, if you want to use that kind of language, view of social issues. But I think, in a way, maybe the point that you're making, and here I think this is very important, is that the parties and the structure of the parties actually prevent people from coming together across the ideological divide. One of the things that, in my experience in the Reform Party, for example, which was a true left-right coalition, was that we talked a lot about the building a bridge between the overtaxed and the underserved, for example, and finding that there was actually tremendous commonality of interest and purpose among many different kinds of Americans, but the party system really channels people into a kind of divide, and I think that's part of what we're grappling with. And I think independents have an important role to play in helping the country as a whole reshape some of these paradigms and create some new tools for us to deal with all of this in a different way.
Jackie, in the limited time we have left, I'd love your brief thoughts on whether 2020 presents an interesting opportunity for independent voters and possibly for something other than just a Democrat and a Republican as a result of the sort of chaos that the Trump presidency has sort of sown, whether that's a challenger from within the Republican Party that ends up running third party or in some other way. Do you think that the 2020 election has some interesting opportunities for independents?
I think it does. I think it raises a lot of really important tactical issues and, if you will, developmental issues for the country. But yeah, there's a huge amount of chaos, and both parties are in chaos, by the way, not just Trump's party, but the Democratic Party is as well. And you have this huge swath of Americans that are out there that are not aligned with any political party. I think there's a basis for some new and, and pretty explosive things happening.
We've been speaking with Jackie Salit. She is president of Independent Voting, and a super interesting topic that we've been covering for a long time. Jackie, I really appreciate you talking to me today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was great talking to you, too.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The NRA, of course, the National Rifle Association, is the largest gun lobby in the United States. They have now named former convicted felon and illegal firearms salesperson Oliver North as their president. Now, you might be saying, David, what do you mean former convicted felon? You're either someone who is a convicted felon or you're not. And what I mean is that Oliver North was convicted in the Iran-Contra affair in the late 80s. And those convictions were eventually reversed and charges were dismissed. So while he was at one point a convicted felon, he is no longer. But just because the legal system can reverse the conviction doesn't mean that it can reverse Oliver North being a horrible person. And one of the things North did was to sell guns illegally. Do you understand the sick irony of this? The guy who is going to run the biggest gun rights group and gun lobby previously sold guns illegally to Iran and to terrorists. His involvement in the Iran-Contra affair was participating in the sale of weapons to Iran with money passing through shell organizations. And then his later political life has also just been horrible. And the NRA has named him the president, replacing Peter Brownell, who decided not to run for a second term. We heard from Wayne LaPierre. He's the executive vice president of the NRA. He says that the selection of Oliver North as their president is the most exciting news for NRA members since Charlton Heston was president of the NRA. So it's been a while since they've been this excited. Aside from being a convicted felon, a former convicted felon involved in illegal gun sales, North also just represents the idea of government outside of our Constitution, because when he was involved in his illegal gun sales, he was involved in what was a government plot that included money laundering, supplying arms to hostile nations, and in too many ways, it's similar to what we're seeing under the Trump administration, actually. And I even know a few Second Amendment folks here in Massachusetts, not NRA folks, right? Like, they're not extreme Second Amendment people. They often are not even NRA members. They think that this is terrible. They think that this is terrible not only for the NRA itself, but for legal and moderate gun owners everywhere. To have someone like Oliver North with the corruption and criminality that he has in his background, and it's not just general wrongdoing, it's wrongdoing specifically when it comes to weapons. To have this guy leading the NRA is angering even moderate Second Amendment people. And in a way, it's not even that shocking, right? The fact that in a time where Trump said he was going to drain the swamp, and it's been just filling of the swamp, in a time when everything is the opposite, everything that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Democrats have been accused of doing by Trump through his campaign and by Republicans, everything they've accused, they are doing themselves. Why not bring in a guy who has a problem with guns and the law to actually run the National Rifle Association? It's insanity, and it's insanity in how it's not even really that shocking, because there were like 5 bigger scandals just in the last 24 hours. Remember when Donald Trump supposedly saved something like 1,000 jobs at the manufacturing facility of Carrier in Indiana? It was touted as this major win for the economy, a major win for Trump. And at the time, I told you that this was not actually what it appeared to be, right? This was not economic policy. What Trump did was just give some cash to one company. It's not policy. You can't run a country that way. We also learned that long-term, the money that was given by Trump to Carrier wasn't actually going to save jobs, because Carrier's own executives admitted that they were going to use that money to do even more automation over the medium and long term. They temporarily didn't lay some people off in exchange for money that they were going to use to lay people off over the medium and long term. I told you all of this. In July, we learned that Carrier was indeed going to do a wave of layoffs in Indiana. And now Carrier is doing another wave of layoffs in Indiana. And they are laying off these employees because they're hiring 500 people in Mexico for less money. The New Yorker did a piece on this where they actually interview employees who are being laid off. And for the most part, they believed that Trump had saved them. They believed that Trump had saved their jobs back during that big showboating announcement that Donald Trump and Mike Pence did. And of course, the Trump administration will say still, well, 500 are going to Mexico, but there are hundreds that are staying in Indiana. That's true, but those are mostly the administrative and office jobs, not the manufacturing jobs. The office jobs were never in jeopardy of being moved to Mexico. It was always the manufacturing jobs that we were talking about. And one of the really, really sad parts of the article that actually, I just really found it so depressing. The article quotes Dwayne Oreskovic, who's quoted in the article as saying, all Trump has to do is sign an executive order so our jobs don't go across the borders or across the seas. Just sign the piece of paper. It's either a yes, he'll do it, or a no, he won't. And it's really sad to me that folks think it's that simple. It's really sad to me that people who believe in the free market and who would in normal circumstances say, we shouldn't depend on presidential decrees, we don't want executive orders, are now saying Trump should just sign an executive order and save our jobs, in direct contradiction to what the free market, the open market, the unregulated market would dictate, which is reduce costs by sending jobs elsewhere and develop technology to get rid of those jobs altogether and replace them with machines. None of this is actually surprising, but it is really, really depressing. It's not shocking that the guy who lies about everything and has built a career on swindling people maybe wasn't being upfront about his miraculous and heroic saving of Indiana jobs. Trump gave cash to one company to keep some of their jobs in Indiana a little bit longer. At the time, he got a hero's welcome to Indiana. He gained political capital. And now everybody's forgotten about it. Half of those jobs saved are disappearing and people have moved on. But the people who lost their jobs now rather than 12 months ago are still getting screwed. It took 12 months, but they got screwed in the long run. Will they vote Republican again in the fall? I believe that most of them will. I believe that the statistics, which overwhelmingly show that people vote down the party line and that most people in Indiana are Republicans, I believe that although Trump will lose some support in Indiana because of the lie that he had saved those jobs, I do not even believe for a second that in any meaningful way Donald Trump or even Republicans are going to suffer the consequences of the fact that it was all a lie. The jobs were never really saved, and the money they got was to automate away the jobs. And then that's why when I go back and I read an article like this, and I see that Dwayne Oreskovic, who's losing his job, says, just sign the executive order. It's really, really depressing. And I don't care that a lot of the jobs saved are Republican jobs. This is absolutely disgusting, and it is taking advantage of people. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. The number is available 24 hours a day. You can call anytime. People do call at any time of day. Here's a voicemail that came in about Donald Trump's sort of space military that he wants to develop.
Hey, David, I was just calling in. Donald Trump has mentioned a couple times now this idea of a space force, and I just have to say that I think it's a fantastic idea. Think about how that will strengthen the idea of American exceptionalism if we have the first ever space force. Sure, we may have to allocate the entire discretionary budget to the military, but do we really need education or health care? Anyway, I just want to say that I think it's a great idea, and I wondered on just what your thoughts were on the space floor. Thanks, David.
Yeah, we talked yesterday during my interview with David Weintraub about the concerns around the corporatization of space travel, or specifically of going to Mars. There's another element which is even worse, which is the militarization of space and space exploration. As we've talked about before, there's very little sort of legal infrastructure as to who owns stuff in space. There's something called like the Moon Treaty or something like that. I believe it's from the late 70s, and it attempts to outline sort of some parameters, but this is going to be a big deal. And I've talked about sort of waiting around gleefully for when we are able to capture an asteroid that is completely made of diamonds, and all of a sudden everybody on this planet who thinks they've got this really valuable diamond will realize, oh, wait a second, these things don't really have inherent value. Why did I spend 12 grand on this thing for getting engaged? I do look forward to that, but I am also very, very concerned about how quickly, anytime there are financial interests somewhere, you will have the use of force brought in to back up and protect those financial interests. So while I think it's nuts that Donald Trump's focus when it comes to space exploration does seem to be a space force, a space military, whether Trump brings it up or not, as soon as monetizing space really becomes a thing, defending those monetization resources is immediately going to become a thing, whether it's Trump who mentions it or not. So I think Trump is, of course, focused on the wrong thing when it comes to space, but there's a lot of people who are already thinking along these lines. We have a great bonus show for you today. John McCain has said he does not want Donald Trump at his funeral, according to what friends of his are telling the White House. We now have learned about an attorney general who is vowing to break up immigrant families that are crossing the border illegally. And we also are going to talk about Donald Trump urging West Virginia voters to vote against a former coal executive who went to prison. All of those stories and more are on today's bonus show, which you can access two ways. Number one, become a member at joinpakman.com. Number two, become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Both methods will give you instant access to the world-famous bonus show. We will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.